Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the Carroll, Worthington, and Bullock family, we welcome you to the celebration of the life of Robert Curtis Cox, but you all knew him as Bob Cox. I did not have the personal privilege of meeting Bob in this life, but because of the testimony of his family, I can say without a shadow of a doubt that he is a true man of God, and he truly loved God and loved people. Notice I said he is instead of he was. Brother Cox's earthly body did give out and was buried this morning at the Green Lawn Cemetery. But Bob's soul and spirit, which makes up the Bob that we know, is very much alive and has gone to our Creator. And in that, we find comfort this afternoon. Our order of service, we're going to open up with a word of prayer. And then our brother Jerry Grimes is going to lead us in some songs. We'll have a moment where the obituary and some memories will be shared. And there will even be an opportunity for friends and family, whoever wish, to come up and share some memories of our beloved brother Bob Cox. And we'll have some more songs. We'll eventually have a message and also another prayer and some closing remarks. Brother Jerry.
If you would, please open your songbooks to number 848. 848. On the projector there, the number is wrong. Okay. Go by what I tell you. I can hear my Savior calling. I can hear my Savior calling. I can hear my Savior calling. Take my cross and follow me. Where he leads me, I will follow. Where he leads me, I will follow. Where he leads me, I will follow. I'll go with him all the way. I'll go with him through the Jordan. I'll go with him through the garden. I'll go with him through the garden. I'll go with him all the way. Where he leads me, I will follow. Where he leads me, I will follow. Where he leads me, I will follow. I'll go with him all the way. I'll go with him through the judgment. I'll go with him through the judgment. I'll go with him through the judgment. I'll go with him all the way. Where he leads me, I will follow. Where he leads me, I will follow. Where he leads me, I will follow. I'll go with him all the way.
We'll now have the obituary read by Ralph Paunier.
(1952) summer. A lot of you well, I don't know, there's probably not as many as at my age, was the that I met Bob Cox. A lot happened that year. You started thinking about the aging process. Automobiles didn't have air conditioning. Houses didn't have air conditioning. And I had all my life to get to know Bob. He was kind of a special guy. He did things differently. He had 3 modes of transportation: shoes, bike, and a Model. His Model A, he had 3 pistons, shook a lot. Bicycle. Had saddlebags for delivering the Bakersfield Californian. In those saddlebags, he had a gun. But it was not an ordinary gun. It was a squirt gun. But it was because dogs like to chew on his legs. But they only did it once, and they learned to leave him alone. I think that one little statement kind of will give you, if something was a problem, he knew a way to fix it. So even back when he was 20 years old, he was doing that. He graduated to a Buick, and my mother used to kid him about this fancy car that you've got is, the ladies are going to start looking at you. It won't be long that you're going to be a husband. And sure enough, it didn't take long. He was a husband. And that Buick had to go. And he ended up with a 56 Ford pickup. Full truck. He developed one of the first cruise controls I ever knew about in my life. They were going back to Texas. And so before work and after work, he was working on a device for that pickup. He had a pedal that he bolted onto the accelerator so that on those long stretches between here and Texas, he could run the gas with his other foot. So he could kind of give his right foot a breather. So again, the squirt gun, you can see where I'm going with what Bob is. And I say is because he's transferred a lot of what he thinks about into people like you and I. I'm most grateful for, hanging out with him. And he taught me welding. He taught me shop procedures. He just was one of those guys that if you wanted to learn, he was there to help you. He became famous when he got married, and he was in all the papers in all the United States. Now, why does a 20-plus-year-old guy from Bakersfield, what did he do? He married. He was a Cox. So evidently the Wire must have thought that was kind of special, so they made a big deal out of his wedding. And it was just, I remember being at that wedding, and the guys in the machine shop did all the traditional things with the cans and the ropes and the stuff on the back of his truck as he left. The one over on H, building of that in those days. Making a problem was he was always thinking. I referred to him as anything. I don't care how complex or how simple. I never saw a drawing, but I would see him and he'd have a pile of metal. He would start to be putting it together. Time would end, he couldn't work. And he would continue, and finally his project, and they always worked. Now I was surprised he built a tank for us when we moved from G Street over to 21st Street. A big hot tank. I mean, it would have been good for it was a put a in no drawings, and he cylinders on it and springs and counterbalances and the day came when it was time to now the interesting part about that tank, people from Arco came in and they saw that lid work, and he says, who built that? He says, well, Bob Cox built that. Okay, now Arco has a lot certified years. Arco hires Bob to come put a lid on their tank. And he doesn't have a certification in welding. He is not a college graduate, but he can make things happen. And he does. All of his life was that way. I know that in January when he died, and he walks up to heaven, and he goes through the gates, that he is going to hear, well done, faithful servant. Now, there isn't anybody here that can wish for more than those words, that we have done what we were supposed to do. And he lived that way. Long before I was ever saved, I got my first Bible from Bob. It was a NIV. I didn't know the difference between an NIV and a King James or any of the rest of them, but it was a Bible that he gave me. And he practiced his life. He was honest. He was sincere. He was funny. I'm sure he's got to have had down times, but I just don't know when they were, because he made people laugh. Our coffee breaks were always fun. We would listen to stories, and he would tell some stories that I know that weren't believable. But he'd talk about a hoop snake, and I don't know if this hoop snake was supposed to be from Texas or not. But you know how the stories are in Texas are always bigger than they are in California. And this hoop snake is supposed to be, it could roll down a hill and it would grab its tail and it would turn itself into a hoop. And then when it was wanting to hit something, it would hip in reverse and stiffen out and go there. Made a great story, but I'm sure there's no such thing as a hoop snake. He also talked about Texas had wind that was so bad that the women would put buckshot in the seams of their dresses just to keep them from blowing over the tops of their heads. Now, don't know about either one of those stories, but I do know they came from him. And they made good commentary. And by telling you that, it lets you know that he is a humorous individual, a thinker, a family man, As you have seen in the obituary, that he had 4 daughters. I was around when my father came to get him when that first daughter had been born and there was a complication. And he says, you need to get to the hospital. Okay, I'm 10 years old. I really don't understand much at 10. But he had to go. And of course that child didn't make it. But God has other plans, and gave him 3 more that did just perfect. So I don't think I will understand until we get to heaven of why those kind of things happen to us. God didn't do it. I know that for a fact. And but it was a grieving time for him, and it made it a grieving time for me, because it just, as a little boy, it just didn't seem fair that things like this could happen to someone. But in days of, well, I'm going to tell you something about a fellow that came to my shop. I've been in the apartment rental business for 40 some years, and had an office and a shop, and I got involved in building hot rod parts. And so one day, one of my dad's first employees came by to see this 12-foot tall CNC machine. And he's looking at all the airlines and the electrical lines and how everything is formed. And he looks at that and he said, who did that for you? And I says, well, I did. And he says, well, how'd you learn to do that? And I says, well, Bob Cox taught me how to do that. He used to do it in the shop, and it was a legacy that he passed down to me. And he taught me how to work. He taught me you didn't have to always spend big money to do something to make it work just perfect. He was meticulous. If he would take something apart, you could always tell when he took an electric motor or a water pump or something apart, because he would have 3 center punch marks on each side of the piece. That told him how to put it back together. In later years, when I got married, I had a toaster shredded on the kitchen table. And my wife looked at me and she said, boy, you've got a mess there. How are you going to put that back together? And I says, well, in the reverse order of how I took it apart. Well, to me, that's common sense, but it comes from Bob. You know, you learn how to take things apart, and you think about how they can, because you are going to be responsible for putting it back together. And so, you know, we become a product of our environment. I am so pleased that I've got to spend all these years. My phone today is a little more quiet than it used to be, because Bob and I would talk about every other week. Or if there was something that we knew, that we had with, or something that I'd seen where I know that person, I would call him. And a lot of times he says, well, Ralph, who died? And sometimes there would be, and sometimes not. But my wife had lost a sister, and a pastor friend of ours had said to her one time that she was grieving over the loss of her sister. And he says, you know, if you could call your sister back, she wouldn't come, because she's got much better off than you do. And I believe that is true. Now, do I miss him? Do I miss those calls? Do I miss that? Having that exchange with him about stuff and all that kind of stuff? Sure I do. Does the Bible talk about grieving? Yes, it does. That person, but Bob would refer to, if we saw somebody in the obituaries or he heard about somebody passing, his term was, well, they got promoted. Well, Bob's been promoted. I thank him for what he meant in my life, and the tools that I have learned from him over all of these years, because he is, well, he wasn't my father, because my father was building a business, and so I got to hang out with him, and sometimes to a fault, because I doubt if Bob ever weighed more than 150 pounds. But he'd worked to death If there was something to be torqued down on a big engine, get Bob. Now, he was always, he just had that internal gusto that he is to make something happen. And he did all of his life. And I can remember, there'd be some special times where everybody was busy, and so I worked sales. Well, I am not field acclimated. 10 degrees, and I'm in office, and all of a sudden I'm number 2. And I mean, he wasn't mean in any way, but he just had things to do. And he would he was the type that he would delegate to you and says, all right, when we get to the job, we're going to need this and this, and we're going to have a little cool down time while the engine, before we can tear it apart. But you always knew where you stood. As I got older, I would watch when he'd be working in the shop. And you'd have a person that maybe didn't have the skills that he had. Bob never walked real fast, but he was always doing something. And you'd see the new guy that he would be building the same identical engine over in another part of the shop. And when the day would be at the end, you'd look at the production between the guy that didn't have all the years of experience. And Bob would be so far along, much farther in his project. Because when he would walk to his rollaway, he didn't get the tools to do project A. He'd get the tools to do project B, C, and D. And he'd have all this stuff, and then he would go to work. And it's just unbelievable how people who want to think and use their abilities, it's a gift. I consider myself having good mechanical skills, but compared to him, not much. But nobody else, not much. And see the recognition that people would give him in the field. You'd see somebody at dinner that he knew, and they respected him because he could do more for his size. He would engineer service trucks, and he could that they had in the oil fields. As much the way he had it built, not had it built, he built it, and was able to be very skillful. They just don't make many like him. I'm sure that there's others in the world, but I have not met someone that has the skills that, I am so grateful to call him friend. As I'm thinking about talking about this has been a wonderful experience for me, just to be able to go back and think and relive the things that we did. Now, I realize if you went on vacation, you only remember the fish you caught. You don't remember the mosquitoes. You don't the sunburns and all this stuff. You just remember the good stuff. I too only remember the good stuff, and of it. I have known him. Well, I guess their wife knew him. Definitely, of course, longer. It just puts me in a very place to be just thankful to have known him. Thank you for your time.
Number 807. 807. Some glad morning when this life is o'er, I'll fly away to a home on that celestial shore, I'll fly away. I'll fly away, oh glory, I'll fly away. When I die, hallelujah, by and by, I'll fly away. When the shadows of this life have grown, I'll fly away. Like a bird from prison bars has flown, I'll fly away. I'll fly away, oh glory, I'll fly away. When I die, hallelujah, by and by, I'll fly away. Just a few more weary days and then I'll fly away to a land where joy shall never end. I'll fly away. I'll fly away, oh glory, I'll fly away. When I die, hallelujah, by and by, I'll fly away.
What happened, I'm going to try to fix it, but while we're waiting for that, we're going to go ahead and open it up for some memories from friends or family who would like to come up. If you would come up here, because that microphone's kind of funky right now, so if you could come up here and share with us some memories of Brother Bob Cox.
So Rita and I go way back. She was my roommate in college for a year. She was one of the reasons I'm here in California. And my parents weren't thrilled that I was going to be here, but because of her parents being here and knowing they were going to take care of me, helped reassure them. But one of the first meetings with him was Rita and I drove in a stick shift Toyota Corolla from Oklahoma to here to move my stuff. And first time Rita drove a stick shift, by the way. And that was an experience, a story in itself. But we made it, and it was a small car with a trailer, so going over the mountains was kind of hard. And my dad had said, when you stop for the night in hotels, pull in the parking lot with the back of the trailer next to bushes or something to help deter people from breaking in. That was a piece of cake. We pull into our apartment. That was not a piece of cake. Parking lot was a lot smaller. There were posts because of the parking places. I looked at Rita and said, I can't do this. Go call your dad. So fortunately, he was off work. He came home, or he came over to our place, and he backed it. We were hoping he'd get there because I knew just people from the apartment were going to start coming in and needed to park, and we were blocking everybody. So he came in and saved the day. But also, both he and Darlene both took me in, had many holiday times with them. I don't know if Karen and Debbie remember those or not. I didn't do a lot of them because I did go home, but they took me in for the holiday. And then right before getting married, Rita and I moved out of our apartment, and they had a mother-in-law addition to their house. So we were able to live there a couple of weeks before I got married and then Rita got married. So lots of special memories, and knowing that I was well taken care of when I came to a strange place.
I'm Roy Savage. Bob and I go back just a few days. Something like 1955, 6, somewhere along there. We both married within about 2 months of each other. So our families have known each other for a day or two. But I got to thinking and laughing as Rob was talking about the things that Bob was good at. Well, he and I worked hand in hand a lot at church. We became deacons at the same time. But back in those days, people had a habit of bringing stuff to church and leaving it. It was wore out at home. They didn't want it at home. They brought it to church and left it. Well, Bob and I would stick it in the old storage shed, and we'd look and we'd wait. About 3 months, 4 months, Bob backed the truck up, we loaded up. Somebody wondered where it went. We didn't know. We still don't know. It went to the double. How that worked from there, we have no idea. But this is the thing, and I laugh and think of the things that he and I were involved, because a big part of the time I was in charge of upkeep of the building, and Bob did a lot of the work on it, along with myself. But things that we would do, and sometimes we'd get in an awful lot of trouble. If you're old enough to remember the old building, back in the corner was 2 eucalyptus trees. Now the person that planted them was very particular, and she did a lot of the landscaping of the old building. And what was she upset? Because the leaves kept falling on top of the roof, and that was a flat roof on that old building. So it didn't drain very well. So we'd have to get up there 2 or 3 times a year and sweep the leaves off the roof to keep it from leaking. Well, one day Bob and I had been up there cleaning it. We decided that problem had to be solved. Whoa, we're in bad trouble because both trees seemed to disappear. And so, needless to say, for a while we walked very softly. But Bob and I have been great friends for all these years. And we kind of in the same, I went in the automotive direction and the parts business, and he was in the industrial side. But we still kept up with each other. But we had a great time, and I'm going to miss the fact that he's not, I still do miss the fact that he's not around for us to work together.
Sure your dad would find some humor in this.